This is every major World War II fighter plane ranked, from the aircraft that failed their pilots to the ones that owned the sky. Let's start with the worst fighter plane. Number 10, Brewster Buffalo, USA/Finland. Imagine sitting inside a flying barrel. That's the closest description pilots ever gave the Brewster Buffalo, a stubby, overweight, underpowered fighter that the United States Navy thought might actually be competitive. It wasn't. When the Buffalo met Japanese Zeros over Southeast Asia and the Pacific in 1941 and 1942, the results were catastrophic. British and Dutch pilots flying Buffaloes against the Imperial Japanese Air Force suffered kill ratios so lopsided that commanders pulled them from frontline service almost immediately. One RAF report described trying to fight a Zero in a Buffalo as completely hopeless. But here's the historical irony. In Finnish hands, against Soviet aircraft over the winter and continuation wars, the Buffalo actually performed respectably. Finnish ace Hans Wind scored dozens of kills and won. So the aircraft wasn't just bad, it was contextually bad. Flown against the wrong enemy, it became a coffin. That's why it opens this list. Number 9. Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, USA. The P-40 looks heroic, the shark-mouth nose art, the flying tigers. Hollywood loved this aircraft. History was less forgiving. The P-40 was already outclassed when it entered service. Its Allison engine strangled at high altitude, robbing it of the performance that defined air combat over Europe. Against the Messerschmitt Bf 109E and F models, it was consistently outrun, outclimbed, and outmaneuvered. The Flying Tigers found creative solutions, diving attacks, hit-and-run tactics, because sustained turning engagements with superior opponents meant death. That's not a great recommendation for a frontline fighter. It wasn't useless. In North Africa and the Pacific at low altitudes, it could hold its own. But low-altitude niche performer wasn't the brief. The brief was air superiority, and the P-40 couldn't deliver that. Number 8. Hawker Hurricane Mk IUK. Wait, before you argue, hear this out. The Hurricane was critically important. In the Battle of Britain, it destroyed more German aircraft than the Spitfire. That's historical fact. But the reason it ranked well statistically wasn't because it was a superior machine. It was because it was far more numerous, and it was assigned to bomber interception, easier targets than dogfighting Bf-109s. When Hurricanes engaged 109s directly, the results were painful. The 109E outclimbed it, outran it in a dive, and outrolled it at high speed. Experienced German pilots actively sought Hurricanes over Spitfires. The Hurricane was rugged, stable, and reliable. Pilots loved it for those qualities. But by 1941, it was already outdated, and by 1943, had been largely retired from frontline fighter roles. It's not a failure, but in a ranking of combat capability, it belongs here. Number 7. Nakajima Ki-27, Japan. In the mid-1930s, the Ki-27 was genuinely impressive. Japan's primary army fighter before the war, it was nimble, light, and devastatingly maneuverable in Chinese skies. Then the world moved forward, and the Ki-27 didn't. By the time Japan entered the larger Pacific conflict, the Ki-27 was flying against aircraft with twice its horsepower and armored cockpits. It had no self-sealing fuel tanks, no pilot armor. It was fragile in ways that were simply no longer acceptable in modern air combat. Young Japanese pilots were handed Ki-27s and sent into engagements they had no chance of surviving, not because of bad piloting, but because the machine underneath them had already been made obsolete by the war it was fighting. Number 6. De Woytine D520, France. France's best fighter in 1940. And that tells you almost everything you need to know about France's Air Force in 1940. The D520 was actually a decent aircraft. Maneuverable, reasonably fast, cannon-armed. But it arrived in production just as Germany launched Fall Gelb, the invasion of France. Only a fraction of the planned units were operational. The pilots were flying aircraft that mechanics were still learning to service. France fell in 6 weeks. The D520 never got the chance to prove what it might have been. It's a tragedy of timing. A fighter born too late into a war already being lost on the ground. After the fall, some D-520s ended up fighting for the Vichy government against the Allies. There's a bitterness to that story that still hasn't fully settled. Number 5. Polikarpov I-16, Soviet Union. The I-16 was a revolution. In 1933, it was the world's first monoplane fighter with retractable landing gear. The Spanish Republicans flew it against the nationalists and called it Mosca, the Fly. It was brilliant for its era. By June 1941, it was an antique. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, Soviet pilots flew I-16s against Messerschmitt Bf 109FS. The 109F was faster, climbed harder, and could simply disengage at will from any combat it didn't want. The I-16 had no answer for that. Thousands were destroyed in the first days of Barbarossa, many on the ground, many more in the air. Pilots who survived those early weeks of 1941 described a helplessness that never fully left them. Their aircraft weren't just inferior, they were catastrophically inferior. Number 4. Fiat CR-42 Falco, Italy. Here's something remarkable. Italy was still flying biplanes in World War II. The CR-42 Falco was a biplane. Fabric-covered wings, fixed landing gear, open cockpit. It looked like it flew out of 1918. And in 1940, the Regia Aeronautica was deploying it against hurricanes over the English Channel. It's not entirely fair to mock it. In close turning engagements, a biplane can actually be extraordinarily agile. But agility doesn't help when your opponent is 100 miles per hour faster and can simply dictate the terms of every engagement. CR-42 pilots who encountered hurricanes and later Spitfires faced one brutal reality. They could not run, and they could not catch. All they could do was turn and hope the British pilot made a mistake. Number 3. Lavochkin Lag-3, Soviet Union. Soviet pilots had a dark nickname for this aircraft. They called it Lakarovny Garantirovny Grob, the lacquered guaranteed coffin. That's how little they trusted it. The Lag-3 was built primarily from wood, a practical decision given Soviet metal shortages, but one that made the aircraft heavy and sluggish. Its engine was underpowered. Its handling was difficult, particularly during landing, and it had a vicious tendency to snap into flat spins with very little warning. Pilots with fewer than 30 hours in type were regularly assigned to frontline combat. Many of them never came back, not because of enemy action, but because the aircraft itself killed them during takeoff or approach. The Soviets recognized the problem and eventually evolved the design into the La-5, which was genuinely excellent. But the Lag-3 years were some of the darkest in Soviet aviation history. Number 2. Blackburn Rock, UK. The concept seemed logical. Put a powered gun turret on a fighter. Give rear gunners full rotation. Eliminate the problem of aim and lead that killed so many fighter pilots. What Britain got instead was the Blackburn Rock, a single-engine fighter, so slow it couldn't catch the bombers it was supposed to defend against. The turret added enormous weight and drag. The aircraft's top speed was roughly 196 miles per hour. German bombers of the same era were faster. Think about that. A fighter aircraft that bombers could outrun. The Rock flew exactly one confirmed aerial victory in the entire war. It was withdrawn from active combat service within a year of deployment. Its real legacy is as a reminder that even well-intentioned design can produce something that simply doesn't work. Number 1. Bolton Paul Defiant, UK. The Defiant looked like a hurricane. Germany learned this the hard way, briefly. In its first combat engagements, Defiance caught German pilots completely by surprise. Bf 109 pilots dove on what they assumed was a solo fighter, flew into the arc of a 4-gun turret they never saw coming, and paid for the mistake. For a few weeks in May 1940, the Defiant had an extraordinary kill rate. Then, the Luftwaffe adapted. Once German pilots learned to attack from directly ahead or below, angles where the turret couldn't reach, the Defiant became defenseless. It had no forward-firing guns. None. A head-on attack was essentially unopposed. The kill rate inverted almost overnight. In the summer of 1940, 141 Squadron lost so many aircraft in a single day that it had to be withdrawn from the Battle of Britain entirely. The Defiant's moment of surprise lasted weeks. Its season of slaughter lasted months. The most overrated aircraft of the war earns the bottom rank for one reason. It was a machine built entirely around a trick, and the trick only worked once. Now, we move the Legends fighter plane. Number 10, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, USA. ET weighed 07 tons. Fighter pilots mockingly called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, short for the milk jug it vaguely resembled. Neither nickname was flattering. None of that mattered at 30,000 feet. The P-47 was a monster of American industrial engineering. Its Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine produced 2,000 horsepower, 8.50 caliber machine guns in the wings, and a radial engine architecture that could absorb damage that would have destroyed a liquid-cooled fighter outright. Pilots returned from missions with cylinders shot away, oil lines severed, entire sections of wing missing. The P-47 introduced long-range escort capability to the 8th Air Force over Europe, saving bomber crews who'd previously been massacred on unescorted raids. Its dive speed was phenomenal. It could disengage from almost any threat by simply pointing the nose down. Not glamorous, not agile, but ruthlessly, mechanically dependable. Number 9. Macchi C-202 Folgore, Italy. Italy gets an unfair reputation in World War II aviation. The C-202 Folgore, Lightning, doesn't deserve to be forgotten. When Italy mated its elegant MC-200 airframe to a German Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, something remarkable happened. The resulting aircraft was genuinely competitive with contemporary Spitfires and Bf-109s over North Africa and the Mediterranean. American test pilots who flew captured C-202s after Italy's armistice were impressed. The aircraft was responsive, well-built, and handled beautifully at altitude. Its limitations were logistical: poor radio equipment, inadequate oxygen systems, unreliable Italian industry supply chains, not aerodynamic. In the hands of skilled pilots like Terezio Martinoli, the Folgore was lethal. It deserves to be remembered as a serious combat aircraft, not dismissed as a footnote. Number 8. Grumman F-6F Hellcat, USA. When America needed an answer to the Zero, Grumman delivered the Hellcat with a characteristic lack of elegance and total ruthless effectiveness. The Hellcat wasn't beautiful. It was purpose-built, designed explicitly from combat data collected by pilots who'd fought the Zero and survived. It was engineered to win, not impress. Armored cockpit, self-sealing tanks, a 2,000 horsepower engine that gave it advantages the Zero could never match at altitude. Its kill ratio against Japanese aircraft during the war was 19-1. 19 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every Hellcat lost. That number is staggering. By 1944, it equipped every major U.S. carrier air group in the Pacific and dominated the air over the Philippine Sea, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The Hellcat didn't win through finesse. It won by being better at the thing that mattered, keeping American pilots alive long enough to kill more of the enemy. Number 7. Focke-Wulf FW-190A, Germany. When the Focke-Wulf FW-190 first appeared over the English Channel in late 1941, Spitfire MKV pilots encountered something terrifying, an aircraft that outperformed them in almost every measurable category. The FW-190A was faster in level flight. It rolled faster, dramatically faster, giving its pilots an evasive advantage that was nearly impossible to counter. Its BMW 801 radial engine was robust and difficult to kill, and it carried formidable firepower, a mix of machine guns and 20mm cannon. For roughly 8 months, the RAF had no answer. The pilots were ordered not to engage FW-190s in diving combat. They'd simply never catch them. The Air Ministry demanded Rolls-Royce and Supermarine produce a response. The result was the Spitfire Mk9. The FW-190 forced the Allies to evolve. That's the mark of a truly dangerous aircraft. Number 6. Yakovlev Yak-3, Soviet Union. The Eastern Front was a different war. It was fought lower, faster, and with less margin for error than anywhere else in the conflict. And in that environment, the Yak-3 was extraordinary. Light, incredibly light, at low altitude, below 13,000 feet, where most Eastern Front combat occurred. The Yak-3 was faster than the Bf-109G and the FW-190A. French volunteer pilots flying Yaks in the Normandy-Niemen Regiment reported it as the finest aircraft they'd ever flown. German commanders, in a rare tactical concession, actually issued orders forbidding their pilots from engaging Yak fighters below 5,000 meters unless they had overwhelming advantage. Think about what that means. The Luftwaffe was formally avoiding an opponent. That's not a footnote. That's a legacy. Number 5. Messerschmitt Bf-109G Germany. From the Spanish Civil War to the last days over Berlin, the Bf-109 was the spine of German air power. Over 33,000 were built, more than any other fighter in history. The top-scoring aces of the entire war flew it. Erich Hartmann scored 352 aerial victories in a Bf-109. That record has never been approached, let alone broken. The Gustav, the G variant, was the definitive model. More powerful than its predecessors, more heavily armed, more capable at altitude. It was also beginning to show the strain of overdevelopment. The airframe, designed in 1935, was carrying an engine it wasn't quite built for, making ground handling treacherous. Takeoff accidents were disturbingly common. But in the air, in experienced hands, nothing was routine about engaging a 109G. It was a machine that produced the greatest fighter pilots in recorded aviation history. That earns it a place near the top of any honest ranking. Number 4. Mitsubishi A6M-0 Japan. At the beginning of the war, the Zero was genuinely the most dangerous carrier-based fighter on Earth. When Zeros appeared over Pearl Harbor, over Wake Island, over the Philippines, Western pilots were stunned. It outmaneuvered everything the Allies had in the Pacific. Its range was extraordinary. Its climb rate was breathtaking. It seemed to defy the laws of aviation physics. The reason it could do all of this was a devil's bargain. The Zero had almost no armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Every pound of protection was stripped away for performance. This worked as long as Allied pilots didn't know the trick. Once they learned, once U.S. pilots and Wildcats stopped turning with Zeros and started diving and zooming instead, the Zero's weaknesses became fatal. A single .50 caliber burst to the fuel tank, and the Zero became a fireball. Skilled Japanese pilots knew this. They flew anyway, because they had nothing else. By 1943, the Zero was falling behind. By 1944, it was being massacred. But in its hour, late 1941 through mid-1942, nothing in the Pacific sky frightened Allied pilots more. Number 3. North American P-51 Mustang, USA. Few aircraft in history have had a moment as historically significant as the P-51's arrival over Berlin. Until early 1944, American bombers flying deep into Germany did so without fighter escort. They couldn't. No Allied fighter had the range. The losses were catastrophic. Entire crews, entire squadrons, missions with 20% casualty rates were considered acceptable. The P-51D changed that. With drop tanks, it could escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. Its Merlin engine gave it performance that matched the Bf-109G and FW-190A at altitude. And American pilots, benefiting from a pilot training program that the depleted Luftwaffe could no longer match, flew it with increasing superiority. Göring allegedly said that when he saw P-51s over Berlin, he knew Germany had lost the war. Whether or not that quote is perfectly accurate, the sentiment was, the Mustang didn't just win engagements, it won the Strategic Air Campaign. That's the difference between a great aircraft and a war-winning one. Number 2. Supermarine Spitfire, UK. There are aircraft, and then there is the Spitfire. R.J. Mitchell's design, refined obsessively through his final years as he was dying of cancer, produced something that transcended engineering. The elliptical wing, the narrow, precise fuselage, the Rolls-Royce Merlin screaming at full power in a vertical climb. Spitfire pilots in the Battle of Britain described a feeling of complete unity with the aircraft. that it responded to thought as much as control inputs. The Spitfire was continuously developed throughout the entire war. The Mk-I that fought over Dunkirk was a different machine from the Mk-14 that hunted V-1 flying bombs and late-war Luftwaffe jets. It absorbed every improvement in engine and armament technology and remained competitive against every generation of German opposition it encountered. Pilots who flew it never forgot it. That's not just nostalgia. That's the mark of a machine that was genuinely, transcendently right. Number 1. Messerschmitt Me 262 Germany. Everything else on this list, every piston engine, every propeller, every aircraft that defined the first 6 years of this war, became history the moment this machine flew. The Me 262 was the world's first operational jet-powered fighter. It entered combat in 1944 flying at speeds over 550 miles per hour, roughly 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied piston fighter could manage. The pilots who encountered it for the first time in the skies over Germany described genuine shock. There was no propeller arc, no piston throb, just a clean, rising howl as it accelerated away. In the hands of experienced pilots like Adolf Galland, the Me 262 was essentially uncatchable in straight flight. Its 430mm cannons could destroy a heavy bomber in a single pass. Allied aircraft couldn't pursue it in a dive, couldn't match its speed in level flight, and couldn't intercept it in a climb. So why did Germany lose? Because Hitler delayed its production as a fighter, insisting on converting it to a bomber role it was never designed for. Because Allied bombing destroyed the factories and fuel refineries that kept it flying. Because by the time it entered service in meaningful numbers, Germany had already lost the strategic initiative. If you enjoyed this ranking, there are plenty more World War II fighters and forgotten legends still to uncover. So don't miss the next chapter in aviation history. Make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.